On a quiet autumn morning in Vermont, 70-year-old Harold Bennett stood by the lake behind his cedar cabin, his loyal golden retriever Rusty splashing through the misty water. The dog disappeared beneath the surface and resurfaced moments later, dragging a mud-stained canvas backpack heavy with time. When Harold unbuckled its corroded clasp, a single envelope slid free. Its paper yellowed, its seal unbroken, the date 1962 written in a trembling hand. His heart faltered when he read the name on the front, a name he had buried deep for decades. The lake shimmered under the pale sun, as if it had been keeping the secret all these years, waiting for this moment to give it back. The morning after Rusty had dragged that old canvas backpack from the lake, Harold Bennett couldn't stop thinking about the letter sealed inside. He had placed it carefully on the table near the window, where the sunlight pooled like honey across the wood. The paper seemed alive under that light, trembling slightly each time a breeze slipped through the cabin's cracked window. Harold sat with his coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the faded handwriting, wondering if opening it would bring him peace or take away the quiet he had finally made for himself. The scent of damp wood and lake air mixed with the faint aroma of old paper, stirring something deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. Rusty lay nearby on the floor, his golden fur catching the morning light, paws twitching in a dream. Every now and then, the dog lifted his head, watching Harold as if to remind him that the world outside was still kind and ordinary. But Harold's mind was far from ordinary things. That date, 1962, kept echoing in his thoughts like the steady tick of his field watch. It was the year everything had changed, the year a promise had been made and broken on the same day. He remembered the train station, the rain, the woman waving from the platform as the train pulled away. Eleanor. Her name had lingered in the corners of his life, like a song that never finished. He had carried guilt across continents, folded it into silence, and built a quiet existence beside the lake to keep it all still. Yet here it was again, surfacing through time like that backpack, refusing to stay buried. The envelope's edges were soft as cloth when he finally picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. Rusty rose, tail brushing against Harold's leg, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "Easy, boy," Harold murmured, though the words were more for himself than for the dog. The flap gave way with a faint sigh, and inside was a single sheet of paper, its ink faded to a ghostly brown. The letter began gently, the words curved and elegant. "If you are reading this, it means the lake has finally given back what it took." Harold's heart slowed as he read, each line unfolding pieces of a story he didn't know he was still part of. Eleanor wrote of the summer they had shared before he left for the war, of how she had hidden something precious near the North Shore under a flat stone where the water remembers. She said it wasn't just for him. It was for whoever came after, a token of what hope looked like before it drowned. The handwriting faltered near the end, as if written in a hurry or through tears, and the final sentence made Harold set the paper down. "If you ever find this, I hope you will forgive me for keeping his name." For a moment, the cabin's silence pressed hard against his chest. Rusty nuzzled his hand, grounding him in the present. The fire crackled faintly, though he hadn't lit it that morning. Outside, the lake shimmered, peaceful and still, as if waiting for him to come closer. Harold folded the letter carefully, slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket, and stood. The weight of the years didn't feel so heavy when he looked at Rusty, who wagged his tail once as if to say, "Let's go." The sun had climbed higher, catching on the ripples near the North Shore, and Harold felt something stir. Curiosity, fear, maybe redemption. He picked up his cane, whistled softly, and stepped out into the golden light. Whatever waited beneath those stones had been patient for more than 60 years. Now, it was his turn to be the one who listened when the lake spoke. The path that led to the North Shore wound through birch and maple trees, their leaves whispering under the cool autumn air as Harold Bennett made his way slowly along the narrow trail, his cane tapping against the damp earth in rhythm with his steps. Rusty trotted ahead, tail swaying gently, his golden coat shining in the sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. The letter's words echoed in Harold's mind. Beneath the stone where the water remembers. It sounded poetic, almost impossible, yet something inside him believed it was true. After 70 years of living with silence, he felt the pull of a story that wasn't finished, and the gentle pressure of time urging him to finish it before winter came. The lake glittered to his right, every ripple catching light like a page being turned, and with each breath of wind, the air smelled of pine, wet leaves, and the faint sweetness of memory. Harold had not walked this far from his cabin in months, and though his knees protested, he pushed forward, guided as much by instinct as by the loyal shape trotting ahead. Rusty would stop now and then, sniffing at roots, glancing back at Harold, as if to check if they were still following the right path. "We're getting close, boy," Harold murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper carried off by the breeze. He could feel it, the change in the air, the way the forest seemed to quiet as the trees thinned and the ground sloped toward the northern shore. The letter had said something about a marker, a flat stone, and something hidden beneath it, where the water remembers. When they reached the edge of the trees, the ground opened into a stretch of moss and sand. The lake spread before them like glass, and there, half buried in reeds and thyme, was a flat stone dark with moisture and age. Rusty bounded forward, sniffing, pawing at the moss-covered edges, as if he too understood that this was where their journey led. Harold approached slowly, his hand tightening around his cane, his breath heavy but steady. Kneeling beside the stone, he traced its cold, slick surface with his fingers, feeling the faint groove of something carved long ago. Letters worn smooth by decades of water. He brushed away the moss, revealing a single word etched in shaky script. Eleanor. His throat tightened. The name was older than his regrets, older than the ache in his bones. Rusty whimpered softly, his head low, golden fur ruffling in the breeze. "It's her," Harold said quietly, his voice breaking somewhere between disbelief and prayer. The memory of that summer came back sharp and soft all at once. Eleanor's laughter echoing across the lake, her hair catching sunlight like gold, her promise to wait for him when the war called. He had written her once, then twice, and when no reply came, he stopped. Maybe the letters never reached her. Maybe this one, the one he held now, had been meant to find him only when he was old enough to understand what it meant. He placed the cane aside and dug gently around the edges of the stone, his hands trembling but certain. Rusty pressed close, tail still, eyes fixed on the spot. Beneath the damp soil, his fingers touched something solid, wood softened by years of decay. He pulled carefully, and a small box emerged, its hinges rusted, its corners frayed with moss. Harold sat back on his heels, breath fogging in the cool air, the sound of the lake faint but endless. He opened the box. Inside were photographs, black and white, curling at the edges, images of a young man in uniform and a woman standing by this very lake, smiling in the same light. There was a ring, tarnished but unmistakably familiar, and a folded note sealed in wax. Harold hesitated, staring at it. Rusty nudged his arm gently, urging him onward. "All right, boy," Harold said, voice trembling but calm. "Let's see what she left." The seal cracked, and the scent of old paper filled the air. The words were short, written in the same elegant hand as the first letter. "If you found this, you still remember me. What was lost is still love, Harold. Let it rest now." The sun warmed his face as he looked out at the lake, tears forming quietly in his eyes. Rusty rested his head on Harold's knee, eyes soft, steady as the rippling water. For a long time, Harold didn't move. The past had finally spoken, and the lake had kept its promise. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than the one that had brought him there, as if the woods themselves wanted him to linger a little longer with what he had found. Harold Bennett moved slowly along the trail, cane tapping softly on the ground, the old wooden box tucked under one arm, and the folded letter resting in his jacket pocket close to his heart. Rusty padded beside him, his golden fur glowing in the late afternoon light, tail swaying gently with the rhythm of the man's steps. The world felt quieter now, the air thicker somehow, as though every leaf and branch understood that something sacred had just surfaced from beneath the years. When they reached the clearing where the cabin stood, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the lake, turning its surface into molten gold. Harold stopped on the dock for a moment, looking out over the water that had given him the letter, the name, and the silence he had carried for half a lifetime. The gentle breeze carried the faint scent of cedar and cold water, and with it came the ghosts of a time when he'd been young enough to believe that love could wait forever. He sat on the edge of the dock, setting the box beside him. Rusty lay down close, his chin resting on Harold's boot, eyes half closed but attentive. "You did good, boy," Harold murmured, voice soft, roughened by emotion. He reached down to scratch the dog's head, fingers brushing through damp fur. "You always do." He looked back at the box, then at the folded letter in his hand, the one written by Eleanor all those decades ago. He unfolded it again, though he already knew every word by heart now. The ink had faded to brown, but the emotion in it still burned clear. She had loved him. She had waited. And when he never came back, she had hidden their last summer in that small wooden box by the stone where the water remembered, trusting that someday he, or someone who needed to, would find it. Harold stared out at the water, eyes glassy with unshed tears, and for a brief second he saw her there again. Eleanor, standing barefoot on the dock, her laughter rising over the ripples, her hair catching the sun, her hand waving as the train carried him away. He had been so sure life would give them another season. War had a way of making fools of promises. He remembered the day he came back years later, too late for explanations, and how he had built this cabin to stay close to something that once felt pure. He had never married again. The ring on his hand was hers, the one she had given him before he left, a ring that had never belonged to any wife but memory itself. Rusty nudged his leg, breaking the spell. The dog's steady warmth pulled him back to the present, to the world still breathing around him. Harold smiled faintly and rubbed Rusty's ear. "You know, boy," he said softly, "some loves don't end. They just change shape." He looked down at the letter again, folded it carefully, and slipped it back into the wooden box beside the photographs and the tarnished ring. Closing the lid felt like closing a chapter, but not one of regret. More like one of peace. He stood, his knees stiff but strong, and walked toward the cabin, Rusty following close behind. Inside, the fading sunlight bathed the cedar walls in gold. He set the box on the mantel above the fireplace, where old photographs already stood. A younger Harold in uniform, a boy holding a fishing rod, a dog long gone whose eyes looked a lot like Rusty's. For a while, he stood there just breathing, letting the silence of the place hold him. Outside, the lake shifted colors, blue turning to amber, amber to silver. Harold poured himself a cup of coffee gone cold and took his seat by the window. Rusty curled at his feet, sighing deeply before drifting into sleep. The old man watched the water until the first stars appeared, their reflections trembling like new thoughts across the surface. "Thank you, Eleanor," he whispered finally, voice fading into the stillness. The lake made no sound in reply, but somewhere in the ripples he thought he heard her laughter again. Soft, distant, and free at last. The next morning arrived soft and gold, the kind of morning that felt like an exhale after years of holding your breath. Mist drifted above the Vermont lake as Harold Bennett sat at the same old wooden table where the first letter had changed everything. The small box rested beside him, and beside that, a blank sheet of paper waited, its whiteness almost glowing in the gentle light. His field watch ticked quietly, counting seconds that felt longer than they used to. Rusty slept near the door, his golden fur catching the sun, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. For the first time in decades, Harold felt no weight pressing on his chest, only a quiet need to speak, to answer, even if the person who waited for that answer was gone. He picked up his pen, the same one he used when he still believed in letters, and paused. His scarred brow furrowed, eyes moving to the lake beyond the window, where the ripples shimmered like the years that had carried him here. "Dear Eleanor," he whispered as the pen touched the page. The words came slow, halting at first, then steady, like footsteps returning home. He wrote about the life that followed her absence, the noise, the silence, the roads he took that never quite led anywhere. He told her how he had built this cabin not to forget her, but to be near something that remembered her better than he could. The lake, he wrote, had been kind to him, even when he didn't deserve kindness. He wrote about the dog he had before Rusty, and how this one somehow carried the same calm eyes, the same patience. Maybe love finds a way to come back, even if it has to change its shape. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote, but the words did not stop. He told her about the box, about finding her name carved beneath the moss, about the photograph of her standing by the lake all those years ago. And then he paused, staring at the sunlight spilling over the paper, catching the edges of his silver ring. "You were right," he said aloud, his voice soft but steady. What was lost was still love. Rusty stirred, lifting his head, brown eyes curious. Harold smiled faintly, reaching down to scratch his ear. "Almost done, boy," he murmured. He folded the letter once, then again, and placed it gently inside the wooden box beside Eleanor's own. For a moment, his fingers lingered on the lid, tracing the worn grain of the wood. He didn't seal it, didn't hide it. He simply left it open, as if the air itself could carry the words where they needed to go. Stepping outside, he felt the crisp wind brush his face. The lake stretched wide and still before him, its surface catching the sun like glass. He walked down to the dock, Rusty following close, paws clicking softly on the boards. The same spot where the first letter had returned to him now glowed in the light of morning. Harold knelt, set the box down, and for a while said nothing. He only listened, to the water lapping gently against the dock, to the breath of the wind moving through the pines, to Rusty's quiet sigh beside him. "Thank you," he said finally, eyes on the horizon, "for keeping her safe." He touched the box once more, then rose slowly, his cane steady beneath his hand. As he turned back toward the cabin, a gust of wind swept across the lake, lifting a few fallen maple leaves into the air. They drifted together for a moment before settling again, just as softly as they had risen. Rusty barked once, sharp and bright, and Harold laughed, a sound that felt strange and right at the same time. "Yeah," he said, smiling down at the dog. "I think she heard us." The two of them stood for a long moment at the edge of the dock, bathed in golden light. The world was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt alive, the kind that carried both memory and forgiveness in every ripple. For the first time in a long, long while, Harold Bennett felt that the lake had nothing left to return. That night, the lake did not sleep. A soft wind moved across its surface, whispering through the reeds and brushing against the wooden dock like a memory come alive. Harold Bennett stirred awake just before dawn, the quiet sound of Rusty's low whine pulling him from his dreams. He sat up slowly, rubbing the stiffness from his hands, the faint light of early morning touching the edges of the window. The cabin felt different, lighter somehow, as though something unseen had shifted. Rusty stood near the door, ears forward, tail still, watching the lake through the open curtains. Harold smiled faintly. "All right, boy," he murmured, pulling on his olive field jacket and grey wool cap. "Let's see what's got your attention." The old man stepped outside into the pale blue of morning, the air crisp and cool against his skin. His breath rose in mist as he made his way toward the dock, cane tapping softly against the planks. Rusty followed close, golden fur shining faintly in the light. The lake lay still, glassy and pale, yet something shimmered beneath its surface. A faint, flickering light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Harold stopped at the edge of the dock, the same spot where he had placed the box the day before. The wooden boards creaked under his boots. "You see it too, don't you, boy?" he whispered. Rusty barked once, softly, as if answering. Beneath the clear water, something glowed faintly near the reeds, a soft, golden hue that wasn't sunlight, not yet. Harold knelt slowly, joints creaking, and peered closer. It wasn't the box, it was something else, something small, glinting under the ripples. He dipped his hand into the cold water, wincing at the chill, and felt his fingers close around smooth metal. When he lifted it out, the water slipped away to reveal a small pendant, a locket, its surface tarnished but still intact, shaped like a heart. The faint engraving on it read simply, E+H. His breath caught in his throat. "Eleanor," he said, barely more than a whisper. He hadn't seen it in 60 years. He remembered now. She had worn it that summer, the one before he left for the war. He had clasped it around her neck himself, promising to come back. He never knew she had lost it. Or perhaps, he thought, the lake had simply kept it until now, waiting for him to be ready. He sat there for a long time, the locket resting in his palm, the early light washing the water in gold. Rusty pressed his head against Harold's arm, as if grounding him in the moment. "Guess she wasn't done talking," Harold said softly, smiling through the sting in his eyes. He opened the locket carefully, the hinges creaking faintly, and inside was a small, faded photograph. Him, in uniform, younger than he remembered himself being. On the opposite side, a lock of hair, pressed and preserved by time. The wind rose gently across the water, lifting the surface in small ripples. The lake seemed to breathe with him, alive and full of memory. Harold looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise. "I think I get it now," he said quietly. "You didn't want me to keep looking. You wanted me to see that I was never really alone." Rusty barked softly again, tail wagging now, sensing his master's calm. Harold clasped the locket shut and slipped it into his jacket pocket beside his field watch. The morning sun broke fully over the mountains, bathing everything in golden light. The water shimmered, no longer mysterious, only peaceful. Harold stayed there a while longer, hand resting on Rusty's back, feeling the warmth of the dog's heartbeat under his palm. "Let's go home, boy," he said finally. Together they turned back toward the cabin, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their boots echoing like a song. Behind them, the lake was calm again, its secret kept, its promise fulfilled. And for the first time in many years, Harold Bennett felt truly whole. Not because he had found something, but because he had finally learned how to let it go. The afternoon light lingered longer than usual, painting the Vermont lake in soft gold that shimmered like memory itself. Harold Bennett sat at his wooden desk by the window, the same place he had opened the first letter and written the one that followed. Rusty lay curled at his feet, his golden fur glowing where the light touched him, breathing slow and steady, as if the world outside no longer hurried. The locket now hung from a nail above Harold's writing desk, catching stray sunlight whenever the wind moved the curtains. It swung gently, casting tiny flashes across the page before him, a fresh sheet of paper, blank but expectant. Harold's fingers traced its surface, the way a man touches a moment he knows will outlive him. His silver ring glinted softly, the old field watch ticking like a familiar heartbeat. He had spent his years in solitude, yet it had never felt empty, only unfinished. But now, with the lake's secret returned, something inside him felt settled, like a chapter closing with no bitterness, only grace. He dipped his pen into ink, steady despite the tremor of age. "To whoever finds this," he began, his voice quiet but certain, "I suppose you found your way here because something called you. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope. This lake has held more than water. It has carried stories, promises, and things time tried to forget. I once thought silence was safety. Now I know silence only keeps love waiting." The words flowed easily, his eyes reflecting both youth and years. Rusty raised his head, ears twitching, and Harold smiled faintly. "I'm almost done, boy," he whispered. He wrote of Eleanor, not in grief anymore, but with gratitude. Of the years that shaped him, of how the world had changed, and yet kindness never really left. He thanked the stranger who might one day find his words for listening, for remembering. He ended with a single line. "If you sit quietly long enough, the lake will tell you what it told me. Love never goes away. It just waits to be seen again." He set the pen down and leaned back, letting the words dry in the warm air. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, stirring the water into soft ripples. The wooden dock creaked faintly, familiar, steady, alive. Rusty stood and stretched, then nudged Harold's knee with his nose. Harold chuckled softly, resting a hand on the dog's head. "All right, partner, let's take it to her." He rose slowly, sliding the folded letter into a small tin box, placing it next to the locket inside. His cane rested in the crook of his arm as he stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and fading leaves. The sky burned softly orange near the horizon. Each step toward the dock sounded like part of a hymn, one he had waited decades to finish. When he reached the edge, he knelt down, joints creaking but steady, and set the tin box into the shallow water near the reeds, where the sun touched the surface. The current took it gently, carrying it toward the center of the lake. Harold watched until it disappeared beneath the reflection of clouds, his lips forming silent words of thanks. Rusty sat beside him, head tilted, eyes locked on the last glimmer of the box, before it vanished. Harold smiled, placing a hand over his heart. "She's got it now," he said. The breeze swept through the trees, scattering crimson leaves over the dock, some landing on Rusty's back, some drifting into the lake to follow the tin box's quiet journey. For a long while they both stayed there, an old man, an old dog, and a lake that had finally given everything it was keeping. When the first stars appeared in the reflection of the water, Harold rose again, slower this time. "Come on, boy," he said, his voice soft but content. "Let's go home." Rusty stood, shaking his fur, tail wagging once, as they turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the golden light flickered in the windows, a warm pulse against the darkening trees. Harold paused at the door, looking once more at the lake, the place where love had waited, and peace had returned. He smiled, the scar above his eyebrow catching the last glint of daylight. Then he stepped inside, Rusty following close behind, the door closing gently against the evening wind. And outside, the lake settled back into stillness, holding the sun's last light in silence, keeping, as always, what mattered most.